Assalamu alaikum fam, hope you're doing well. So, as you know, I'm making a playlist on some just quick points that I have about the Mikhaila Peterson, Mohammed Hijab, and the Ayaan lady. And what I really thought was interesting was how Ayaan didn't like body coverings. She seemed to really lack respect for modesty, which I found highly peculiar since we're in an age of hedonism. It's almost like she has no respect for religious coverings. Would she say the same about how women, nuns, and Eastern Orthodox women cover? It's just really strange if you sit back and how they complain about the niqab and stuff like that, and how it's like women should have to have their validation based upon their beauty, and their flesh should serve the eyes of all those who wish to see it. You know, as someone who studied art history, is part Italian and part Cherokee, there's a long history of hair, the body, the human form. But at the end of the day, there's still this element of pornography and hedonism and a weird type of gluttony mixed with like food and women. And you want to start protecting your daughters from it when you realize that Hollywood has really created some strange women, celebrities, musicians, who really start to get body dysmorphia. They start to really be too obsessed with their flesh. And then you get the other spectrum of people who are morbidly obese, and then there are the people who are like French models and anorexic, and they starve themselves and they're bulimic because they care so much about what the gazes will think when they look at them. And she doesn't take into perspective all the women who love their niqab, such as me. I always find it really interesting, you know, as someone who grew up thinking that Christina Aguilera, J-Lo, and all these awful occultic role models, that they had some sort of secret to like human vitality, female energy, but at the end of the day you realize it's just sin, degradation, inversion, subversion, nothing glorious, nothing honorable, a dead just nothing. And now, when I put on the niqab, the hijab, the himar, jilbab, stuff like that, I really feel so close and bonded to it. I love the way that I don't have to be in a pantsuit anymore with the tightest fitting jeans, hoping that people like what they see, and now it's the beauty has been put on the back burner, and I just focus on consciousness and knowledge, and it feels so liberating and freeing to not have to be eye candy for every pervert dude or lesbian or bisexual that happens to pass by. And growing up where you're always fixated on your hair, is it perfect? You know, I used to put beads in my hair, like just your nails had to be perfect. The constant Barbie culture, it gets tiring after a while, and then when you add up the time, the money, you realize you're doing that all for other people, pretending it's for you. And then the more obsessed you become with your body, the more almost alienated you become from it. And some of the most beautiful women, you know, they're still mentally ill, they still have problems, so beauty isn't this sort of liberating force. And if women like me and others see the wisdom behind covering, and we want to cover, we should be allowed to. And, you know, I remember mocking, you know, when I was 12 years old, in my head how modest Mormons were. But then when I started becoming less modest, and then I analyze it backwards, you know, looking back in time, I attracted a lot of bad men. And this isn't to say that men won't harass hijabis, niqabis. I understand. Those dudes are of another degenerate level. But we have to be honest as women and know the way in which we dress will attract certain personalities, right? You know, there's a lot of psychology behind clothing and adornment and how women dress and what energy that emits from them, what vibe they're trying to match, what they're trying to have sort of creep, sort of this magnetism, like what they're trying to have come near them as well. I've had many styles of clothing throughout my life, and the most immodest clothing is the one that causes immense psychological damage and produces some of the most cruelest, meanest women who don't age with grace. They cling to youth like, you know, and they just imagine dragging someone by their ankles and there's women who are just scraping their fingernails into the concrete, right? That is what those women are like, who chase plastic surgery and they want to have the perfect body, and then they spiral into this weird mirror abyss of narcissism and vanity and pompousness, and all that is for many healed through religious garments. And it's just interesting how, you know, she points that out, and I have a lot of respect for the women who wear burqas and gloves. It's like that takes a level of iman, and I do understand that there are men who are really horrible in the way they go about bullying, harassing, threatening women to wear it. I have received some of that. And then you see people who are like, you know what, it's up to you and between God. You're encouraged, it's an obligation, but I physically can't do anything, and I'm not going to nag you to death because I'm too busy doing what I got to do. That kind of energy works better. And I feel like in today's age, we have a lot of positive things we can say about the niqab, because all the proof is all around now more than it was in the past because of the internet and social media. We can see how Photoshop and implants and weird filters and all this editing stuff can make women look like they have perfect bodies, when in reality it's just a fake illusionary image that they still get dopamine from. And for hijabis, niqabis, and, you know, Muslim women in general, we cut all that off, and it's like your brain kind of relaxes. You know, that's how I feel. My brain relaxes, and I like not having to smile at everyone. You know? I know in my eyes you can tell when I smile. But there's something very just pleasing about just... I had to be forced to smile when I had customer service jobs. And inside I would be screaming and raging. I just hated it so much. I hated having to be the butterfly. And the niqab lets me be a little bit more serious. I'm not saying you have to be grumpy, but it allows me to just be like, okay, interact with my eyes, and I just look in the pits of your eyes. If it's a male, obviously try to lower my gaze as much as possible, and then use my ears to pick up on the tones of what they're trying to say. But when it comes to women, just looking in the pits of their pupils, it's a very powerful way to connect. Beyond just the facial mirroring, because that's also a psychological body language technique that's really mastered in business and HR departments. So it's a fake sort of mirroring that isn't really real and tangible. Some people it's authentic, and others, just like actors, they can fake it. So I found it quite disturbing how she just only had negative things to say about modest religious clothing in an age where we have half-naked women, you know, cheerleaders on football teams, teens falling into prostitution, human trafficking, stripper culture, you know, the brothels exploiting young women, women becoming traumatized, you know, and that the signs of a broken woman really can appear when they start to show their body too much and act too degenerate. And this is something that the secular liberal atheist feminists deny, and they kind of help human trafficking with their sexual revolution. They'll answer on Judgment Day, but not all of us want our daughters on the altar of Shaitan. We don't want to have our daughters on the altar of the occultists and we don't want our daughters to be a paraded object of vanity and lust and allure for strange men, because we know stalkers, harassers, and very strange people with broken psychologies and perverted souls, the more they see, the more they come at you. And we are living in a society that has remnants of the high morality, right? Where women can be beautiful and nothing will happen to them. But as drug addiction spreads, as we don't have a unified culture, and we don't have the same social values, and as more of the demonic becomes mainstream, all this kind of Wiccan, Gothic, kind of, strange, dark vibe becomes more mainstream. These women pretending to be witches and covens, and these voodoo queens in New Orleans, and strange kind of death worshippers arise. We know that they always go for the flesh and lust, hedonism, and the body. That is one thing that you can tell them by. That makes them the opposite of the religious who choose to be modest. Now, can you be modest and still sin? Of course, people fall into sin. Can you be exposing your body and still be good? Well, that's a bit trickier, because you know someone by the way they talk, the way they walk, the way they act, their actions. The actions of what they chose to dress themselves in, shows they want to tempt married men. They enjoy making other women jealous. They want to make wives uncomfortable about their bodies. They kind of want to put pregnant women to be uncomfortable. There's a lot of honesty that isn't allowed to be said because of the philosophies of the liberals, and even some conservative females have lost their actual religious standing. They're just blonde hair, blue-eyed, big-boobed, and they look like a doll, but they have zero, faith in their own religion. They have no modesty and shyness anymore. So they're kind of just like the same as the liberals, except liberals are more anti-child and just kind of more vicious in their, lust for dismembering children through abortion. So, again, the philosophy of the conservative and the liberals in America, and the atheists, and the new rise of open occultism, they all have this sort of show the flesh philosophy. And we know this does cause real world problems. And that's never going to go away. So some of us choose to raise our children in a more modest way. And many of us women who grew up around just pure debauchery, right? We choose modesty, and it feels like a covering blanket and protection. And Allah has ordained it for us. And we do the best we can. Each woman has a different level of iman. So we can agree, on a man shouldn't, take a woman's face and bash it into the concrete because she didn't put gloves on, right? That'd be excessive, right? But, there's a balance there, right? You have a standard, and then you try to urge people to the standard, but you don't, I think, harm them. And other countries, that type of freedom or that type of choice is different. So I understand if it's forced upon people and they're not really true Muslims in their heart, it can feel like a burden, right? But if you are someone who is growing every day, you learn to like it, and that's part of the process. So I think there's a balance to be had, a deeper discussion to be had. But for her to be, against modesty and not speak about how so many young girls are having mental illness and self-cutting and other issues, body issues, I feel like that's a bit dishonest. And plastic surgeons, making so much money off of female insecurities, giving them illusions of, well, just pay us, $7,000 and we'll make you attractive to men. And then when you start to sag again, come back, pay us more money. And then come back again and again and again. And is that healthy for female psychology, to kind of always want to slice their bodies up? Every woman needs to also, I would argue, confront her insecurities. And covering up cuts off a lot of the judgmental stares that make women more cruel to one another. Women are cruel to one another when it comes to their bodies, their shapes. And so the niqab kind of cuts off a lot of the judgmental evilness and venom that resides within many women. And it makes things a bit less dramatic. And it's graceful the way it blows in the wind. You know, it's not all negative. So when she was talking to Mohammed Hijab, I thought of all those things and thought, you know, she hasn't really looked at the problems in America, but rather is stuck on being an anti-Muslim person. And she failed to recognize, when she was supposedly a Muslim, the beauty of covering up. And then when she saw the contrast, when she came to America, she totally embraced that sort of satanic energy, where it's like, you show your flesh, you know, just be an object. She seems to be quite fine with that. I just found it quite odd. I wonder if she'll ever think back and really do a comparative analysis of modesty and stuff like that. Let me know what you think.